Welcome to the 180-day Applied Educational Neuroscience Scope and Sequence. This is an introduction, and I am Dr. Lori Desatel. And the toolkit that you will be incorporating and integrating are actually practices that I have been integrating into schools, classrooms, working with administrators, teachers, students. So really, this is a toolkit, a scope and sequence that supports the four pillars of applied educational neuroscience. When we think about the adult nervous system, which is pillar one, we think about how co-regulation is our biological priority, which is pillar two. And then we think about the significance of touch points, which are those micro moments of connection that can happen through the way we look at a child, the way that our tone of voice sounds, how we greet, how we leave each other. That matters. That's the third pillar. And then the fourth pillar is really teaching and joining up with our colleagues and with our students in learning more about how our neuroanatomy is underneath the behaviors that we see every day. So this scope and sequence, incorporating all four pillars, has many lessons that will prime the nervous system, getting us ready for whatever subject content we are teaching. It does not have a specific time, although we have suggested times at the beginning of the toolkit, the scope and sequence, but you could take 2 minutes, you could take 5 minutes, you could integrate this for 20 minutes, depending on the overall nervous system of the class. So in each of these days, these little modules, you will have a topic, and then you will have guiding questions. And then the middle column is filled with the suggested time, although please understand this is not scripted. Again, it can be when the time is right for you, and how long depends on what your situation is that day. And then we've got suggested tasks and lessons with some materials that we've added. Again, this can be, however it best meets the needs of your sophomores, of your 8th grade classes, of your staff, of your support staff. These practices are to be integrated for adults. So thinking about how we begin a staff meeting or a PLC, a department meeting. When the adults have the experiences of integrating these during meetings, we feel more comfortable in our nervous system as we share these with our students. So my graduate students, and I want to share thank yous to Connie Persicki and also to Angie Zara, who worked so hard in helping me to format these lessons, are really about how we can create a flow of practice throughout our buildings that is a part of our procedures and our routines and our transitions. So with that, I want to share just an example of a lesson that, again, can have 1,000 faces depending on the developmental age, depending upon the time that you have, and how you want to begin to introduce this work. We know right now that our children and youth are experiencing significant chronic adversity and trauma. The mental and emotional challenges that our children and youth are carrying into our schools and districts has never been this statistically high. So when we think about these practices, we are really, and in the four pillars, we're really teaching our students also about why they feel the way they do. Because when you understand that I'm not a bad kid, I've done nothing wrong, it's true for me as an adult. When I understand why my stomach is hurting, why my ears are burning, why I can't get a deep breath, when we understand that, then we can begin to really listen to our bodies and to pay attention to how they are communicating ease or some significant discomfort. So I pulled up this one, which is day 93 out of 180 days, but it's really looking at stress and the brain. And when we think about the question, what is the stress response system? Our children and youth, along with us, we need to understand what happens in the nervous system when we are experiencing chronic uncertainty or trauma. And even if the event has passed, the body can hold on to that discomfort, that unease through this overproduction of cortisol and adrenaline, which are our stress hormones. So when you think about how our brains and bodies are always communicating, and they're constantly in this flow of information sharing, what we understand is that in states of stress, which can be chronic unpredictability, chronic uncertainty, our nervous system is trying to protect us. And this is what we want our children to understand and our youth to understand. And so in a protection mode, we cannot access the prefrontal cortex. We cannot think clearly or reason or be logical. Sometimes it's hard for us to pause before we say something or do something that is hurtful or that we will regret. It's hard for us to pay attention and to have good, strong working memory. So all of those academic functions that I just mentioned cannot be accessed unless we get that nervous system calm, help that nervous system to feel safe and to feel felt. So in this day 93, we are really just exploring with our students, what is that stress response system? And understanding that our brains and bodies are constantly talking to us, and that when we track, when we are really able to share how we are feeling without guilt, without shame, then we begin to feel that dampening down of that overproduction of cortisol and adrenaline. So in the third column of the scope and sequence, we are providing YouTube links, we are providing graphic images of ways to track and ways for our children and our adolescents to track their nervous system states. So when you can see, we've given a little, as you can see on this day 93, we're using anchor charts. And as educators, we all know what an anchor chart is. We use those to highlight our most important topics. So we start with a brain anchor chart that we shared in the previous lesson. We introduce new vocabulary words. How cool is that, that our students understand that the anxiety they feel in their bodies is about their limbic system or about their prefrontal cortex going offline, or about their nervous system producing too many chemicals, neurochemicals, so that they are feeling that rapid heartbeat or they can't get a deep breath. So along with the vocabulary words, we give you a little kind of a clip of what's happening in the nervous system and how our stress response system is experiencing those conditions where our body begins to move into protection. So at the bottom of the task or lesson, you'll see differentiation strategies. So maybe we need extra processing time. Maybe students need to break into small groups or partner up to share their takeaways. Maybe they are willing and they feel safe enough to share a time in their life when their hearts were beating rapidly, when they were sweating, when their ears were burning. And we, as the adults, can really model times in our lives when it was hard for us to focus or to remember important information. This happens when we have test anxiety. This happens when we are nervous about a change in schedule for many of our children or a routine in the classroom. So it doesn't have to be huge stressors. It can be an accumulation of these small experiences where we don't feel safe or we don't feel felt with each other, and we're not experiencing that sense of calm or that sense of groundedness where we can speak, think clearly, be logical, reason, and ask questions that are helpful to us when we do feel stuck in that stress. So over to the last column, you'll see the polyvagal chart, which Deb, Dana, and I worked together to modify, placing in the green this social engagement system where we feel calm. The red area is that fight flight. It's where the body and the brain are preparing for threat or protecting us from feeling not safe or from something that feels unfamiliar or threatening. And then in the blue area is where we still are in a state of stress, but our nervous system is shutting down, meaning that we are in that frozen collapse state where we don't feel we can run from the stress, and we don't feel that we can fight off the stress. And in a classroom, this collapse shutdown has many different behaviors that we observe and may not realize what's happening. This could be when a child has significant absences, when hoods are over a student's head, when work is rarely being completed or started, when we see our students very disengaged. And oftentimes we misunderstand that collapsed, immobilized shutdown state is really one of sometimes feeling numb, feeling hopeless, feeling untethered, feeling lost or abandoned, and we don't know how to begin. The sensory information, the stressors are overwhelming to the nervous system. So we have several days. You can see day 94. We're not just doing this in one day. You could spend 2 weeks on the stress response systems. And you can see that we've got resources for adults and for the students. And in many of these resource sections, we have divided them off with elementary and then secondary resources. But again, I don't want you to think, oh, I can't use this because it says grades 3. I still want you to look through the resources, because sometimes our children and our adolescents, they might need a version that is maybe a bit younger or a bit more developmentally appropriate to where they are emotionally. So these are, again, YouTube videos. We've got articles. There will be practices, videos that we have used with our children and adolescents, and the practices from my past 5 to 8 years being back in the classroom. So we are so excited to share this scope and sequence with you. This is a snapshot, a quick overview of this 180-day educational neuroscience scope and sequence. As we think about these practices, it is critical for us to remember that behaviors are only a signal to what is happening in the nervous system of a child, of an adolescent, or even in our own lives. And so as we begin to integrate this scope and sequence into our classrooms, think of this as part of the discipline protocol in your district, building, or your classroom. These are tier 1 practices. This is preventive, brain-aligned, relational discipline that happens through our procedures, our routines, and our transitions.